Now let's take this down to the level of implementing skills in normal, mundane, everyday situations. We're going to use the example of using reason to work with anger. We'll begin with a quote from Zhuangzi, who was a Chinese Taoist philosopher. Zhuangzi says, "If a man is crossing a river and an empty boat collides with his own skiff, even though he be a bad-tempered man, he will not become very angry. But if he sees a man in the boat, he will shout to him to steer clear. And if the shout is not heard, he will shout again and yet again and begin cursing, and all because there is somebody in the boat. Yet if the boat were empty, he would not be shouting and not angry." Clearly, there's another way to approach a situation where people make us angry. So it comes down to the simple fact that we often cause much of our own suffering by getting upset without need. The question then becomes, how can reason help us respond better to specific life situations in which anger need not be involved? Let's approach this by applying the models that we've been working with. We've seen the appraisal theory of emotion, where interpretations of the situation determine the emotion we feel, and the dual process theory of reasoning, where there is both a fast intuitive system and a slow deliberative system. These can be integrated. The cognitive appraisal involved in emotion invokes reasoning about the situation, which we can see as carried out, mostly unconsciously, by the intuitive system 1. While the more reflective system 2 offers the capacity to reconsider or reappraise the situation, potentially altering the emotional outcome. So the two models can be integrated. All right, now let's look a little bit deeper at the appraisal theory, and then we'll be able to apply it to reason and anger. The cognitive appraisal phase of emotion considers numerous variables. In response to a potentially emotion-evoking stimulus, System 1 first rapidly appraises whether the situation is relevant to your goals, and this determines the intensity of the emotion. Next, it appraises goal congruence, or whether the situation helps or hinders your goals, and this decides the emotion's valence, or whether it is pleasant or unpleasant. Finally, other variables determine the emotion in greater specificity, and there are many more than are depicted here, but we're just going to concentrate on 3: coping potential, agency blame, and degree of certainty. Let's begin with the variable of coping potential. This refers to how much we feel able to deal with a threat to one of our goals. So the degree to which we feel able to cope with the problem influences the emotion that will result. Now notice that there are actually 2 different ways that we can cope with problems. One is, of course, to resolve the problem in some way, but another is to adjust our goals. The ancient Roman Stoic philosopher Seneca addressed the latter, talking about anger as a result of having expectations that are too high. We have goals that are unrealistic. We need to adjust them to be more realistic. Seneca tells the story of a man named Vidius, who becomes so angry at a servant who breaks a wine glass that he orders him to be eaten by lampreys. Apparently, Vidius believes he lives in a world where servants never break wine glasses, and that unrealistic expectation, dashed, incenses him. To be less easily angered, he needs to adjust his goals, making his expectations more realistic. We can practice this same thing by taking to heart what's normally called the serenity prayer. Here, I've given it a slightly more naturalistic touch by calling it serenity gardening. So we can say to ourselves, I plant in my garden serenity to accept what I cannot change, courage to change what I can, and wisdom to know the difference. And then if we follow that advice and really take it to heart, we will find ourselves in a place better able to cope and not get angry so easily. All right, let's move on to the variable of agency or blame, which is how much we feel some person or agent is to blame for the situation. Now, if there's another person to blame, what we often feel is anger. If, however, we feel that we are to blame, we might feel something like shame or guilt. And if there doesn't seem to be anyone to blame in the situation, we might either feel annoyance or just a calm acceptance of the situation. Now, the view of naturalism fully accepts that we are all caused beings. Everything about what we do is a confluence of all the causes that come to bear upon us. These include both genetic factors and various environmental factors, including the people we're around, those that we've learned from, our parents, our raising, etc. Now, just like the boat from Zhuangzi's story, we can think of people as being these naturally caused events, including ourselves. And if we do that, the instinct is slightly less to get angry and slightly more to just calmly accept the situation as a natural process. And then we get some leverage on our own tendency to anger. Okay, let's see this in action in a concrete situation. Consider driving on the freeway. First, she cuts me off on the road and I say, "What a jerk." But now let's change the situation. Let's say instead it's me who cuts her off and I say, "I had to get to the exit. I'm not a jerk. I had to get to the exit." What's going on here? There seems to be a bit of a double standard. This is what's called the fundamental attribution error, which is blaming inherent qualities in others more than you do in yourself. In this case, when the other person cuts you off, you immediately jump to "what a jerk," an inherent quality of the other person. But when it's yourself, there's some external environmental reason. "I had to get to the exit." So there's a double standard. What we can do in situations like this is practice seeing the boat. We can see the other person as a fully caused being, a naturally caused being. We can ask ourselves, what led this driver to behave this way? What difficult experiences may have affected them? And if we do this, first of all, we're more likely to feel compassion. But secondly, we're actually more in right relationship with reality because people are fully caused beings. Lee Fitzgerald of the Spiritual Naturalist Society actually talks about this as compassion as a form of intellectual integrity. Now, you might be asking, wait a minute, doesn't this let people off the hook? Well, we're all still responsible for our actions. Caused or not, we all still have to learn how to behave well in the world. But the focus shifts to reform rather than this sense of vengeful anger. So as we deal with other people, what we can do rather than get angry is just be firm. I'm a teacher, and a hard-won lesson for me has been learning that when you are teaching, especially when teaching young students, you must be the authoritative voice in the room. But if you let yourself get upset, you lose all your authority. So there's a very important difference between being firm and being angry. The last variable that we're going to talk about is certainty. And this is how much we feel that we are correct in our cognitive appraisal of the situation. Often we nurse our anger about a situation, obsessing to convince ourselves that we are correct. We often even go to other people and vent, primarily because we're seeking some kind of social approval that we are correct to be angry. Actually, there's scientific research that shows venting is counterproductive because it tends to reinforce the anger habit. A better approach is suggested by the philosophers from ancient Greece called the skeptics. What they did was something very similar to the society's own humble approach to knowledge. They found that when they just let go of this need for certainty about their beliefs, surprise, surprise, what resulted was a sense of tranquility. At the same time, they were actually more in right relationship to reality because, honestly, we never know if our beliefs are correct. We can always be wrong. To fully accept that is what the ancient skeptics did. As a result, they found that this is actually more conducive to happiness. Now, the image on the left here could just as well be from a Nazi rally as from a fight for human rights. The difference is where your motivation is coming from. If your motivation for your cause is coming from the right place, you will not be stuck in this suffering, which is anger, but you will be moving from a place of tranquility. To sum up, how can reasoning about appraisal variables help us in real-life situations like these? First of all, dealing with coping potential, we can remember to practice serenity gardening, changing what we can change and accepting what we cannot. Dealing with agency and blame, we can practice seeing the boat, envisioning other people and ourselves as fully caused beings, natural events. Finally, we can deal with the variable of certainty by letting go of the need for certainty and letting right action flow from a place of tranquil humility. With all these variables, intuitive system 1 reasoning pushes us in one direction. But if it turns out to be inappropriate, we can use reflective system 2 reasoning to reappraise and change our emotional outcome. Now, the ending to Zhuangzi's story is actually quite surprising, and I'm not going to give any comment other than just to give you the full story and let you ponder what it might mean. So the ending is, if you can empty your boat crossing the river of the world, no one will oppose you, no one will seek to harm you.